Greetings, dear ones. I'm Kryon of Magnetic Service. It is the second channel in the Yucatan Peninsula, the node. We continue to honor the land that is here, the knowledge that is here, the codexes of knowledge that are presented in the structures. This is the celebration of 30 years from the time I sat in the chair with my partner until this day. And in that we wish to review some of the items that I started with, that I gave you originally all those years ago. And tonight we speak of just two. In the very small white book that was written in 1993, is information which has now come forth and is germane to our times. And so many of you don't know it because that book, although it is still in print and still popular, is not necessarily the one you've read. But I'll present these to you now, and you will see how they relate to even the teaching of the day. I started the book by my introduction to who I was and the term magnetic master. People will ask, well, what does Kryon have to do with magnetics? What is it that is so special with a scientific attribute? Start looking at what I gave you back then. Number one, I told you that there would be no Armageddon, despite the fact that you were in the middle of the Cold War. And within 2 years, the Soviet Union had fallen over. It was in the field, dear ones. It was happening even as I was speaking. Even as the book was being written, it was happening. There was no fortune telling there, for it was in the coherence that was among the things happening in the world. 89 was the year of the demise of the Berlin Wall. It wasn't long after that that you knew that this planet was headed for a future that had no predictions. The ones in Scripture, it was about Armageddon. The ones from Nostradamus, about Armageddon. Even the ones, some of which were from Casey, painted a doom picture, which did not happen. I gave you the information, and it was controversial, and many did not believe it until you saw the things start to happen and occur, and the year 2000 came and went, creeping toward that magic precession of the equinoxes, the 36-year window around the end of 2012. That was the first thing I told you, so that you would not worry, even though it went against all the prophecy that had been given to you at that date by those who called themselves spiritual and were in touch. Even today, the profundity of that is you are sitting in a culture, in a civilization, in a humanity without predictions. There were no predictions past this point except from the indigenous. Did you know that there are other Mayan calendars? They have calendars in calendar language on the shelf, ready to go if you had passed 2012, and you did. This is what they do. Cycles. And the second thing I wanted to tell you was about a cycle. And now I reveal something that only several times I have spoken of before. I'll do it more concisely this time. The scientist Greg has revealed something that is now understood. Consciousness, that elusive thing that only now is being studied and understood as a piece or a part of energy, consciousness is somehow related to the magnetic field of the planet. Somehow. Today you learned that when the magnetic field is in a cycle that is low, as measured in microteslas, when it is low, that these are the times when war often starts and stops, the beginning and the end of cycles on the planet that are tied to something as profound as war and peace are related to the cycles of the magnetic grid. That information alone should start multiple studies of how there is any kind of a relationship between that energy of human consciousness and that which is magnetic on the planet, the grid that protects you, the one that interfaces with the heliosphere, another magnetic field that is even stronger from the sun. Why is it related? What is there? What can you learn? What does it mean? First of all, it's cyclical. But that's not all. If you read the book, you will see that it is about the movement of the magnetic grid in another way. Not in its intensity, but its, call it, orientation to the earth. In other words, where is true magnetic north? And what difference does it make? We told you in that book that the magnetic grid of this planet would move and you could see it with a compass. Later in channelings, we said that it would move more in 10 years than it had in 100. And since this is well documented and measurable, these are not esoteric things. Magnetics was on the move. If your consciousness is related to the magnetic field of the earth, that was going to affect. That was going to affect you. It did. Dear ones, those things occurred, and you can go back and see what I would call that brief march of a fast-moving magnetic grid where true north kept moving and moving and moving, and you could measure it. So profound was it that your technology had to change. You might recognize that when you landed here, you landed on a runway which had a number. That number just happens to be the compass heading in one direction. For all pilots to know on all of their maps worldwide. And if true north moved greatly past 1.5 degrees or even 2, that number, according to the rules worldwide, would have to be repainted on that runway. Why don't you ask them when it was? Because it was all around this world, for the exceptions of certain ones in the very north and the south, were repainted because the magnetics changed greatly. Some said it was changing so fast you were headed for a magnetic pole reversal. You weren't. And And then we gave you the reasons why. Even this day it was brought up, who else might have been affected by a magnetic change? Whether it gets higher or lower intensity, or whether it moves direction, who is affected? And the answer is everyone. Everyone, everything. Plants, insects, animals, and oh, by the way, anything that has migration. Now in this day and age, the scientists understand the birds, the whales, anyone who migrates, anything that migrates, any animal has a built-in compass. A little magnetite in the brain goes a long way to understanding what the directions are. Let me ask you who are listening to this now, just as proof, do you remember a time when the whales beached themselves on a regular basis? And the answer is yeah, you do. You also remember that stopped as well. This was a readjustment of the animals that depended upon knowing where magnetic north was in order to migrate. And when this channeling occurred, it was before then, and then it happened and you could see it and you could track it, that the magnetic grid was moving. And even though whales knew it, they didn't understand. Well, they always went before where there was clear water. Suddenly there was an isthmus or a peninsula in the way, and they would ground and beach themselves. Slowly, through generations, they learned to go around. But that in itself should show you something was going on. And the earth, all of it, knew it. But why? I made a very esoteric announcement that I was here to help move that grid until 2002, when I said that it would stop moving in that intensity, and it did. I actually said I had a grid group. Why? Oh, dear ones, the why is the celebration, not the 30 years. The why is the celebration. And it's germane to what is happening right now in this 2019 date. The why. Why would magnetics move? And the answer is because it was in preparation for a higher consciousness to come to this planet. Already you knew the magnetics was related to consciousness. Now, if you move it a certain way, it gives the ability for a higher consciousness to develop, fulfilling the prophecy of the Maya. That past 2012, humanity might very well see the highest consciousness it had ever had. And you're there. You're sitting on the very land where those prophecies were given. And I am here to move the magnetic grid. The magnetic master is now explained to you. Oh, but there's more. There's always more. 2020 is coming. It's a year, I told you last week, that would be difficult because it would expose duality. The dark and light would start to show itself more than ever before. It would be difficult because inappropriate things would start to show. Almost like the dirt would start coming out of the cracks, and some would be afraid, but others would realize that it had always been there. And you would see it in your politics more even than you see it now. You would see it worldwide in many countries who may very well lose their leaders yet again because of inappropriate actions that they used to do in the dark that they cannot do today. We told you that corporations would start showing inappropriate things, big ones, huge awards being given that may very well topple some inappropriate pharma. That is in store for 2020. It's about revelation. And at the same time, you learn today that it is a cycle ending and beginning. And it was the teacher Greg who said, it doesn't mean that there's going to be another war. Instead, what it means that you have the opportunity to come to this decision with a higher consciousness to make things different, and maybe, just maybe, the end of war. I said it before. Humans on the planet do not want to suffer or go through the horror of something called human nature. And now for the payoff, the big statement. Human nature, dear ones, is not static. You were told that it was only because that's all you've seen a certain way. The new alignment of the grid allows for higher consciousness, and that changes human nature. Human nature, that is a new human, does not automatically go to war. Did you hear that? That's the difference. And that's why I'm here. Right on time for the science that starts to see the correlations between what has happened on this planet and what happens in consciousness. The dirt of the earth and all that is there in the knowledge starts to be imbued into the consciousness of the grids and humanity. And they start to think differently. Just two of the things I brought to you all those years ago are here in your face right now. That is the celebration. And so it is.